So it does continue. More bad news from CD Projekt Red around Cyberpunk 2077 and actually also The Witcher 3 this time, as the company just announced on Twitter an important production update. We have an important update regarding next generation updates of Cyberpunk 2077 and The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt for consoles and PC. Based on recommendations supplied by teams supervising the development for both games, we've decided to postpone their release until 2022. Our current target for Cyberpunk 2077 is the first quarter of 2022 and the second quarter of 2022 for The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Apologies for the extended wait, but we want to make it right. So this is actually a pretty interesting one, at least for me, because on one hand, it's not super surprising. We kind of expected Cyberpunk to get delayed. During their earnings call in early September, they described how during the past year and taking into account the fact that this project remains in development, we can't promise the production schedule will not change. That in reference to the next-gen version of Cyberpunk. So it kind of seemed like the writing was on the wall. All right, we're not 100% sure we're actually going to get this out. And to me, it definitely seemed to signify a delay was likely to come. But on the flip side, there wasn't nearly as much caution with The Witcher 3's next-gen version. And in fact, The Witcher 3's next-gen version is being made by a completely outside studio, Saber Interactive. So the fact that The Witcher 3 is getting delayed even further is actually quite surprising, and that's a decent-sized delay, about 6 months potentially. And to be clear, when they say Q1 and Q2, Q1 is January, February, and March of 2022, and Q2 is April, May, June. So The Witcher 3 next-gen version may not actually come out until June of next year, which feels like it is an eternity away at this point, and definitely a huge leap from the end of this year. So now obviously there's some mixed reactions to this, a lot of backlash, but not necessarily about this announcement in general, but just the news overall. It's been pretty much radio silence from CDPR for a while now. We had this update a month ago, we had the larger update about a month before that, but otherwise we really haven't heard much of anything. And in a way, it almost feels like we're getting on this trend in a sense that when we kind of do get these updates in between, it's not necessarily positive news. And with so many people waiting for a decent amount of time now, this isn't the brightest news to come out of the woodwork. But for me, honestly, I'm not super bummed by this, mainly because I want these to be good. And I think CDPR actually learned from releasing Cyberpunk in the state it did. The way they described the next-gen version, it really seems like they kind of want to do a soft relaunch of the game, or at least that's how I've been interpreting it. In the past, they described how the next-gen version is an important step of our adventure in the Cyberpunk universe. As I said before, we strongly believe in the long-term potential of this IP. So expect it on the Cyberpunk side, and honestly not even that huge of a delay on the Cyberpunk side. A Q1 release is still pretty nice, but The Witcher one is definitely a bit more surprising. This also, to me, just makes me extremely curious as to what's going to happen with Cyberpunk's future. What is the timetable we're looking at? As I mentioned before, it's been a fairly long time since the last update, about a month, and an even longer time, 2 months since the last major update. It seems pretty likely we get at least one more major update, hopefully before the end of this year, but when? The patching on this game has been incredibly slow, and although they have been making good progress, and I don't necessarily think them being quiet until they actually have something to say is a bad thing, I am definitely surprised with how gradual a pace this has been. I definitely thought we'd be getting onto some more fixes or improvements on existing systems, not just bug fixing still. And even further, as you look into next year, it makes you wonder, when are those expansions coming? We saw from that update in early September that a good chunk of the team is working on expansions now. Also, the most people are still working on Cyberpunk and its next-gen version, but could this mean that the first expansion is going to come out in summer of 2022 for Cyberpunk? That's definitely a decent-sized wait, especially in comparison to The Witcher. And aside from all of that, you also do have this curiosity with the DLC. We got 3 DLCs with patch 1.3 2 months ago, but then nothing. Haven't heard anything else about just those free DLCs, and seemingly they're planning to release about 17 in total. So yeah, that's really the update with Cyberpunk, a relatively small one, but fortunately things are coming a bit later than expected, and this news has definitely not been received super well. The stock took a big drop immediately following this, I think because there was expectations of that next-gen version hopefully being a soft relaunch, getting player interest renewed, and of course if you could do that around the holiday season when spending is at its highest, that's a great thing. And even as a separate aside from that, we've started to see some pretty sharp player declines yet again. Over the summer, things really stabled out and we actually saw player gains, but in the past month we've had one of the sharpest player declines since release, at least if those Steam numbers alone are anything to go by. With that said, that's another update. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.